Hi, I'm Pastor Dick Stadler, and I'm here again with Father Chuck Carter and with Ann Carter, and we're talking Sunday readings. And we're talking the Sunday readings for Pentecost 16, the 16th Sunday after Pentecost. And we're going to talk about two Old Testament readings because different lectionaries will be scheduling those. And we'll first listen to or discuss Isaiah 55, 6-9. And then we'll discuss Exodus 16, 2 to 15. And then for our epistle lesson, Ann will be leading us in a discussion of Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 to 30. Is that right? I think. And that will cover both lectionary readings because some have some verses, some have others. And then Chuck will be leading us in a discussion of Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. So if we can go to Isaiah 55, 6-9, what I'd like to do is share my screen and show it to you because it's got one of the classic features of Hebrew poetry. And then you can look for that classic feature when you listen to other Psalms or read them in your own Bible. And so let me see if I can quickly share that with you. There, can everybody see that? And the main theme of this is God's ways of doing things are superior to anything we would think of doing or imagining doing. And we're going to see that illustrated in all three readings today, that God's ways are definitely higher than our ways. But look at how the poem sets this up. A lot of features of our poetry involves rhyming, rhythm, and patterns and so on. But one of the characteristic features of Hebrew poetry is parallelism of thought. And so they'll put one thought in one line and then a similar thought, but said with different words in the next line. And you see that in classic form right here. So verse 6 starts out with seek the Lord. And then the same thought is expressed in the next line, call upon him. And you seek the Lord while he may be found. And the same thought is paralleled in the following line, while he is near. And then the next two lines in verse 7 parallel each other. Let the wicked forsake his way, and then the unrighteous man his thoughts, which is a wicked man. And then in the next part of the verse, let him return to the Lord is paralleled in the next line with and to our God. So you're both going back to God. That's the thought. And then that he may have compassion on him and he will abundantly pardon. You see how those thoughts parallel each other? It's just a beautiful thing that happens in Hebrew poetry. And then in verse 8, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And then he parallels that with the same thought, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. And then in verse 9, you have the first line paralleled in thought by the next two lines, but those two lines are parallel to each other. So you've got a double parallelism within this verse. It's really neat. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts. Well, I hope that helps you understand how Hebrew poetry works. I'm going to close this now. And do you have any questions before I change it, either Chuck or Ann, about this, or any thoughts? Oh, we got it up.
It's just a great example of parallelism.
Yeah. Now, there's other features that I'm not going to get into. So, but if your pastor or somebody you know knows those, they can point them out to you. Okay. Now we're going to go on to the next verse, which is the Old Testament lesson in Exodus. And this is Exodus 16, verses 2 to 15.
A reading from Exodus. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we, that you grumble against us? And Moses said, When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat.
And let's get the background. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and God miraculously delivered them by sending 10 plagues on Egypt that broke the will of the Pharaoh. Then when they are released by Egypt and they're sent out, the Pharaoh changes his mind. He chases after them with his army, and at the Red Sea, God opens the way for them. And then when the army comes chasing in after them, he closes the sea and kills the army. And so you've got a number of manifestations of God's goodness to his people. And every time one of the plagues hit Egypt, the Israelites were spared. And so it did not affect them. And now they are continuing on from their deliverance. And it says in the first verse of the text that they were on the 15th day of the second month of their traveling. And so they're only 2 months away from all these miracles that they have seen. And then, of course, of the Passover was just really a dramatic miracle that showed how God took care of them when they put the blood of a lamb on the doorposts and the angel of death passed over them. But in this reading, you can hear the word grumbling, at least in the ESV translation, 7 times. It just keeps coming back. And I think it's a wonderful literary tool that Moses uses in order to emphasize these people are ingrates. These people can't seem to get used to saying thank you, God, and trusting in him no matter how many manifestations he gives them of his miraculous power. And so they start complaining because they don't have enough food to eat. And they glorify their past. In verse 3, they say, Wow, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by meat pots and ate bread to the full. Excuse me, they were slaves. They're glorifying their past. I doubt that this what they're remembering here is true. And and then Moses accuses them not of grumbling against him and Aaron, but against God and putting God to the test. And later in this same reading, listen for that, he will say the same thing again. Only God is the one who's going to be saying it. And so what they don't realize is that when you grumble against God's called prophets, his spokesman, you're not just grumbling against the man. You're grumbling against the God who sent him too. And that's what they're guilty of. Now, at this point, God had every right, according to his justice, to just wipe them off the face of the earth, just wipe them out and start all over with a fresh group of people that Moses can lead without so much difficulty. But what he does is an amazing thing. His thoughts are definitely higher than our thoughts. And our normal human response, if somebody was this ungrateful and grumbling against everything that we did, we would just say, give up on them, forget them. But not God. These are his chosen people. And so he says, I'm going to rain down bread from heaven for you. And he tells Moses. And then he says, and I'm going to send meat for them to eat. And sure enough, every morning when they get up, there's this dew on the ground, and there are flakes of stuff that they can make into bread, and they can bake it, and they can boil it, and whatever they want to do with it. And they don't know what it is, so they say, manhu, what is this? And that becomes the name for this bread, manna. Okay, it's really a question. What is it? And so maybe nowadays we would call it whatchamacallit. You know, hey, give me some more of that whatchamacallit. We'll make it into muffins, and we'll make it into pancakes or whatever we have to do with it. And every evening, quails came in with the wind, and just tons of quail meat, and they had plenty to eat. And so God then reminds Moses that I've done this for them. In the evening, verse 13, quails will come up. In the morning, dew will lay around the camp. And when the dew is gone, there on the face of the wilderness was a fine flake-like thing. And we're told in other parts of the Bible that it tasted like a sweet mixture or like an oil mixture. And so they could make it into all kinds of bread materials. And Jesus takes this manna that God miraculously sends down raining from heaven as a picture of himself, and calls himself the bread come down from heaven in John chapter 6. And he says, even though this bread that the Israelites ate for 40 years, and it never ran out, every day there was manna there except on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath. And on those days, they were supposed to take a double portion on Friday night and not go out at all on the Sabbath day, and trust that God would provide for them. And they weren't to take any more than what they needed for one day, and trust that God would take care of them. And that's why at the very end of this reading, God says, Moses says to them, this is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. And the Lord himself tells Moses, they shall then know that I am the Lord their God. And that's what was supposed to be reminding them. Now, will the lesson last? Now we'll get some more readings in the Old Testament, which will indicate that they can forget and start grumbling again. But any other thoughts that the rest of you have?
Well, I have a couple, and I would like to just be on the side of the Israelites for just a moment. Because when in Exodus 13:5, the night of the Passover, Moses promises he gives the people the promise of God that he is going to give to them a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, I would just imagine that I was a mother and I'm 2 months out into the wilderness, and all the foodstuffs I got from the Egyptians is gone. And I've been promised this land of milk and honey to feed my kids. Where is it? I'm just trying to play a little devil's advocate and say, I can understand 2 months is, I mean, we've been into this pandemic now. We've been into shutdown for 6 months. It can be a long time to wait for something when you had an idea that it was going to be a little different. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
On another note, I would like to, in chapter 16, verse 3, the Israelites say, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread back in Egypt, in verse 12, God says to them, you shall eat meat and you shall have your fill of bread. It's like he's repeating the words back to them. What you thought you had in Egypt is nothing compared to what I am going to give you. And he's throwing the words back at them, that what you thought you had is nothing. You just be patient. With God, everything is a process. It doesn't just come boom. It's a learning, it's a growing. And that's what I have to say about that.
Well, that's a good reminder that this is really an example of God's higher thoughts and his ways of doing things that are superior to anything that they could even suggest.
Mhm.
And it's kind of interesting how this manna is used in the poetic literature of Hebrews or in the Old Testament. It's called the grain of heaven in Psalm 78. It's called the bread of angels in Psalm a little bit later in that Psalm. And so it's just used as a lesson throughout the scriptures as the providing of a good God, a gracious God. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anything else before we go on to the epistle lesson?
A reading from Philippians. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full coverage now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all, for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus, because of my coming to you again. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have.
Okay, and
Okay.
it's your turn.
Philippians is written in, it's New Testament book. It's written by Paul. It has another, I think next week we're going to discuss one of the most famous poems that there might be in the Bible. That's in the next chapter in Philippians. I noted two things in here. It's a beautiful passage that Paul, it's almost he's reminding himself, I would rather not be here anymore because I know where I'm going and I would rather be with Christ, but I know I need to be here because that's better for you people in the church all over the Mediterranean, but especially you people in Philippi. And that reminded me of a conversation that I had with my mother-in-law when she was in the nursing home. And she was in her 90s. She didn't know why she was still here. She was in reasonable health. She couldn't walk very well, but she had her brain. And we had lots of great conversations. And she didn't know why she was still here. And I said, well, you're here because you have to help me. And she said, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, you're praying for me. Oh, I am, she said, every day. And I said, that's what I need. We're all in this together, so you have to pray for me so I can raise my kids and I can be a good wife and I can work in the church like I was doing, and so I can teach because I need you behind me. And a lot of people My age bracket now, people are retiring, people are moving into a different sort of life, older than me. They're wondering what the point is, what the purpose is. The purpose is that whatever we do it to the glory of God. And if we can pray, if we can ask God to enter the lives of those that we love, we are doing the church a whole service. We're doing our families an incredible service. Pray for our country, pray for our president, pray for those who are sick, pray for healthcare workers. The power of God entering into this world can change the world as it did in the first century. It can now. So those are my 2 points that I.
Good reminders. And if we remember that this letter was written from prison, we aren't sure whether it's prison. It sounds like prison in Rome, because he sends greetings from Caesar's household, and so apparently some of the people converted. But even in prison, he rejoices, and in this letter especially, you'll see it in other sections, but he especially reminds them that God is using this for good, and he's asking his readers to learn from that. And I think that is a good reminder for us that sometimes when the worst things happen, this pandemic, being locked down, all these things, God can use that, and he has, to unleash unbelievable creativity in the Christian church about how to get the word out now. And many churches are taking the things that they've created during this pandemic, and they're going to make it a permanent feature of their ministry. And so I think that's just a wonderful example of how God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And Paul caught on to that, and he absorbed that, and he shared that, just as you indicated. And so it's just a wonderful reminder.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house, who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and to them he said, You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again, about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, Why do you stand here idle all day? They said to him, Because no one has hired us. He said to them, You go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.
If we turn to the gospel reading for today, it takes us to Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. And this is a kind of well-known reading about the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. The householder goes out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard who will work for him for the day. And he finds some who are out there who are willing to work for the denarius, the standard day's wage, from the first hour and work throughout the day for him. And then he goes out again. He needs some more workers, goes out at the 3rd hour and agrees to terms with them. He goes out again at the 6th hour, the 9th hour. Then he goes out again finally at the 11th hour, and he finds others there who are needing to work. And so he brings them in and to work on his vineyard. And so when the day is done, the first hour workers are expecting their denarius, the wage that they had agreed to. But what does the master of the vineyard do? He gives each employee the same amount, a denarius. And those who had worked the whole day start to grumble, kind of like in our reading from Exodus. There's grumbling. God's ways aren't fair, if you will, to some. And so what does he say? He says, uh, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last as I give to you. Essentially telling them, this is what you agreed to. And though you may have worked since the first hour, these are the terms and you agreed to them. So I'm not doing you any wrong, and then to the last, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me, in verse 15? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first and the first will be last. And so we have here the way I've heard it put before, this is gospel math, meaning this is the way in God's kingdom, the last will be first, the first will be last. A denarius, to those who have worked all day, a denarius to those who came at the last hour. When we interpret this spiritually speaking, it's often interpreted as, the day is often seen as the span of a person's life. And so those who have known Christ, who have been in the church, who have been involved in this from early on, go throughout their whole life, and they will receive the same reward that somebody who comes to faith later on in life will receive as well. And so it's a lesson to anybody. It's a lesson of hope for those who are who may just be getting into this later on in their lives. And it's a word of caution, you might say. I don't want to say warning, because I think that's too strong, but it's sort of a reminder of the nature of the God that we worship, that we serve. And it's also a word to towards humility as well. That the reward is the same. We're going to make it to the same place. The outcome will be the same. And so I want us to kind of take back to the word from Isaiah and then also from Exodus. My ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord. And this sense of divine, you might say justice, the sense of we have there, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? It's not ours to judge, whether somebody gets it right or somebody has been in the church for a long time. You can think of examples of people who have spent their entire life in church and it doesn't really seem to take, you can find examples of people who are, just find out about it and all of a sudden it's their whole life is consumed with love for God, and they make what can only be described as a miraculous change to their life. And so in that verse 16, which shows up in many places in the gospel, so the last will be first and the first will be last. It's kind of the great inversion of God's values when they intersect with the values of the world. What we imagine as human beings to be important and worthy and desirable, in God's eyes, not so much. Insofar as God is far above, far beyond anything that we can hope for or imagine. in this life, in this world. So it's a vivid example, both of human nature, of God's nature, of the task that we have in this life, and also of the overabundant grace and generosity of God. That this is, you know, that the reward, paradise, salvation, um, it's one size for everybody. It's the same God. It's the same relationship with God that He offers to all, regardless of what time you enter into that relationship. Um, so I open it up for other comments, if there are any.
What's the best example in the Gospels of this parable?
Thief on the cross.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what a wonderful lesson for all of us that we may have relatives who just resist Christ and won't listen to what anything that any Christian has to say, but just never give up on them, because they're going to get it all if they just repent and receive Him. And until the last breath is out of their body, just keep praying for them and looking for opportunities to share the good news about Jesus. I think that's really a good reminder. Plus, grace does sound unfair to people. When I was teaching vacation Bible school one year, and we were trying to teach something like this lesson about the first being last and the last being first, um, I told the kids, I've got a whole bunch of candy here, and I want to give it to you, and I'm going to give it to the person at the head of the line first, and then I'll give it to everybody else in line. And so the kids all elbowed their way to get in line. I said, make sure you get in line, okay? And then I went to the back of the line. I said, "Oh, did you think that was the head of the line? No, the back of this is the head of the line." And then we talked about that. And I think there's going to be a lot of surprised people in heaven on Judgment Day, because they're going to see people that they didn't expect to see there, and there are going to be other people who are going to maybe surprised to see them there. And so the first will be last, and the last will be first is just a really good reminder of how God's grace surprises us and gives us immeasurably more than we could hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, we will conclude this week's edition of Talking Sunday Readings. Thanks as always to Tim Carter behind the camera, and hope you will leave us a like, subscribe, and share this with any friends who might find this to be of value. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
So.